Welcome to the CrafteeManatee. Today I'm going to be showing you how to knit these scrappy ornaments. Today's video is different from all of my other videos on this channel because I'm not showing you a crochet tutorial, I'm showing a knitting tutorial. I also love to knit. I have been doing mostly crochet recently, but I love these scrappy ornaments and I thought this would be a great first knitting video on the channel, especially with the holiday season coming up. So this is not going to be a full knitting tutorial. If you don't know how to knit, there are a ton of great videos here on YouTube by other creators who show you how to knit for beginners. This video is going to assume that you have a basic understanding of knitting in the round and doing stranded color work techniques. This ornament is quickly becoming one of my favorite projects. These are the 3 ornaments that I have made so far, and I am planning to make a lot more. I think everybody this holiday season might be getting a scrappy ornament from me, or maybe I'll just collect a whole set for my tree. I love that they turn out differently depending on the yarn you use. I also have 2 variations that I'll talk about. This is the one that I made in today's video that you'll see in a little bit. So this is a spoiler of how my ornament turned out, but these 2 show you the different methods that you can use for this ornament. So this one I call the slightly scrappy variation, and that's because it uses a solid color yarn throughout and then a ball of scrappy yarn throughout. So these 2 yarns worked together in the pattern that I'll show you in a little bit, creates this slightly scrappy yarn. We have our solid color with a scrap yarn peeking through. On the other hand, this is our super scrappy variation, and that is going to be 2 balls of scrap yarn held together that you are knitting between the 2. Again, I'll explain later, but essentially we are using 2 balls of scrap yarn instead of just 1, and the colors are very unpredictable of how they'll line up, and it's just very fun seeing all of the variations of the super scrappy ornament. This one that I'm going to be knitting on camera today is also a super scrappy variation, so you can see all of these colors and how it's totally different than this one over here. I'm going to pop up a link to a video I made showing you how to do the Russian join method to make a scrappy yarn ball, and that is exactly what I used to make these ornaments. So you're going to make a scrap yarn ball that is just combining all of your scrap yarn pieces together. I wanted my ornaments to have a lot of color changes throughout, so I cut scrap yarn that was pretty short to make my yarn balls using the magic join method. So the longest that I would let a strand get was only a few feet long. It was probably the average, maybe 2 to 3 feet per color section. So then it would change to another color section and flip-flop back and forth. And then once you're using the 2 balls of scrap yarn, you'll see how the colors start to work together. And I will admit that on some of these, I did kind of try to curate the right colors. So for this one, I wanted it to be very Christmassy with all of these reds and greens and then some white and black mixed in throughout. These other 2 I kind of just let be random colors, especially this one. This is just a ton of different colors that I had in my scrappy yarn pile. And then while I'm knitting, I do tend to try to avoid 2 colors interacting together. So I did have to cut the yarn on this one because the red yarn was just lining up too much with the other strands red yarn. So those are just things to keep in mind as you are knitting if you want to make it more of a curated yarn ball. Before we get started, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who you think would enjoy learning how to make these scrappy ornaments. Here are the materials that you're going to need for today's video. First, you're going to need about 16 grams of worsted weight yarn divided into 2 equal balls. So you'll have 8 grams in each ball. And for today's video, I'm using 2 balls of scrap yarn to make a super scrappy ornament like this one, where all of the colors are scrap yarn all mixed together. But you could also just do a plain scrap scrappy ornament where you are using one ball of scrap yarn and one ball of solid yarn. So in this example, I used a ball of scrap yarn and then a ball of off-white yarn to create this slightly scrappy ornament. We're also going to need a 60mm plastic ornament, which is about 2.36 inches. This is optional. You could choose to just stuff your ornament when you're finished, but I like the look of this plastic ornament. It helps it make a perfect circle instead of stuffing. It can be a little bit lumpy. Today we'll be using 5.5mm knitting needles, or the US number 9, and we'll need a way to knit in the round. So I'm going to be using a cable and using the magic loop method, but you can also use double pointed knitting needles, which is what most people prefer, but I do like the magic loop. I'm not very good at double pointed needles, so I'll be using that method today. And you'll also need scissors and a tapestry needle for cutting the yarn tails at the end. To get started, we are going to cast on 40 stitches. So I'm going to just choose one of my 2 scrap yarn balls to start the cast on with, since I am working the super scrappy ornament today. As you can see with this completed super scrappy ornament, I start with the scrap yarn and then work my way up, and it all blends together. But if you are making the slightly scrappy ornament, which has the solid yarn color mixed throughout, you're going to start the cast on with that solid yarn color. So in this case, I cast on with the off-white, but you can use whichever color of yarn you want. You can also mix it up. You could do this scrap one, starting with the scrap yarn instead of the solid yarn. So really there are a ton of different ways to start these ornaments, and they all look unique. You can make a million of these little scrap yarn ornaments, and they're all going to look different, which is what I love about them. But I am going to just go ahead and start my cast on with this yarn here. It's just one of my 2 scrap yarn balls. And this is assuming that you know how to cast on for knitting. It's not a complete tutorial. So we are going to go ahead and just cast on 40 stitches. And I will meet you back here for our next round of our scrappy ornament. Alright, I am back with all 40 of those stitches cast on, and I did forget to mention, but you do want to leave a long yarn tail at the end for sewing up the end. This is quite a bit too long. You really just need to make sure that it will be able to stitch around all of these stitches and then be pulled tight to close up the bottom of the ornament. So really, you can do that with a yarn tail that's just a couple of inches long. I just like to have a long yarn tail just to make things more comfortable while sewing at the end. So I've went ahead and split my stitches onto both of my needles, since I will be using the cable to make a magic loop method, which is a little bit tricky if you don't know how to do this, or you can be using your double pointed knitting needles. However you are deciding to work this in the round, and we'll go ahead and join it in the round. But I'm going to go ahead and pop up the knitting chart for this ornament right here on the screen, just so that you can see what we are going to be working. This ornament is a 4-row repeat, or 4 rounds in our case, because we are working in the round. And we are going to just repeat these 4 rounds for a total of 12 rounds. So we'll do this repeat that's on your screen right now a total of 3 times. So I'll work you through the first 4 rounds, and then I'll leave it up to you to complete the ornament. I'll do mine off camera and all of that. And I'm going to go ahead and join this in the round. And I know that I hold my knitting, especially in the round, a little bit funny. So don't take this as a tutorial of how to knit. Just take this as a tutorial of how to make the ornament, if that makes sense. I kind of knit inside out. It's just what is more comfortable for me holding the needles. I know I should try to flip it around, but this is just what's most comfortable. And with knitting and crochet and all of that, it really is what comes most naturally to you. I know people will say that there is a right and wrong way to do certain things, but honestly, whatever's most comfortable for you, if you are getting the same end results, who's to say that it's the wrong way to hold your knitting needles? So I'm going to go ahead and join this in the round using that same ball of yarn that we've been using. So that's going to be our first stitch of our repeat that I popped up is the yarn that we used to cast on. So if you're using the solid color yarn ball, you are going to just continue using that for this first stitch, and then we'll flip to our next ball. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that, but while I'm doing this, since I have 2 balls of scrap yarn, I want to make sure that I can tell them apart. Sometimes it can be easy to tell them apart, but sometimes the yarn will change in ways that gets a little confusing. So I'm just going to take a stitch marker, and you could just use a little piece of scrap yarn, and I'm going to attach that to the yarn that we are using right now that we use to cast on. And this is going to show me that this is my yarn A, is what we'll call it. So this is what we've used to cast on. In my color chart that I popped up, that is going to represent the white squares, and this other ball of yarn will represent the pink squares. So this is our yarn color B. You could add a different color stitch marker to it, but when I do that, I tend to forget which color is my starting yarn. So it's easier that just the starting yarn has a stitch marker, the other one does not. So now we are going to move on to our second stitch of this first round. And this is where we are going to be attaching our yarn color B. So I'm just going to attach that yarn right here with a stitch. And now we're going to be working every other stitch different colors. So what I mean by that, like I popped up the chart, we'll be doing one in the color A and one in color B. And we're going to just repeat alternating that all the way around. So very simple. In my case, we have green, and then we have red. And I like to hold both yarns right here while I'm doing color work. You could choose to drop one and just pick up every other stitch, but I like to have them just both ready, holding on to, and I'll just pick up whichever one I want to knit with. So we are just going to alternate between yarn A, knitting, and yarn B, knitting, all the way around for 40 stitches total. So I will meet you back here at the end of this round, and we'll move on to round 2 of our Scrappy ornament. All right, I am back for round 2, and round 2 is worked the exact same way as round 1. So we are going to start with color A and then color B and alternate between those 2 colors as you go. And as you can see, one of my yarns actually changed colors. So my yarn ball A started out as that light green, and now it has changed to this light red here. So now we are going to be starting with that light red because that is our color ball A, even though it's a different color now, so it can get a little bit confusing. That's where that stitch marker is very helpful because I can follow this yarn back and see that this is the one that has the yellow stitch marker on it. And then we are going to knit in color B. So my color B has stayed the same. So it's going to stack those burgundy stitches on top of each other. And I'll be alternating between this bright red and this dark red all the way around. So go ahead and repeat round 1, knitting your color A and then your color B all the way around, and I will meet you back here for round 3, which does change just a little bit. All right, I am back after round 2, and we have another color change. So my yarn color A has now changed into this white yarn, which is really fun. I'm super excited to see how this ornament is going to turn out. I love knitting these scrappy ornaments and all of the other scrappy yarn projects that I have made before because each one does turn out different. Even though I have planned out these yarn colors to be more Christmassy, you still never know how it's going to look when it is finally knit up. So I'm very excited. But we will move on to our round 3, which is going to be doing the opposite of what we've been doing for our first 2 rounds. So we're going to start with yarn color B, which for me is this dark red here, and I can tell because this white has my stitch marker, which is my color A. So we're going to start with color B. So we are simply going to be going every other stitch like we have been, but starting with yarn B. So I will knit in that dark red and then the white. And you can snip these yarn tails as you go or just ignore them and snip them at the end. This is kind of a natural result of that Russian join method. You're going to have little bits that you might need to snip at the end of your project. But we're going to just continue working every other stitch, yarn color B, and then A, all the way around until we get to the end of our ornament. So I will meet you back here after we have finished round 3 to move on to round 4. All right, moving on to round 4, we are going to do the exact same thing. So we are going to work a color B and then color A all the way around, alternating. So we are going to do color B, which in my case is still this burgundy color. That burgundy is lasting for quite a while, but we are coming up on a color change here. So it's going to switch to black for me. And then we're going to do that tan kind of creamy color. So it has switched to black, but we are going to just continue working back and forth. And this is where it can get confusing and you might want to pause and check which yarn you are working with based off of which is yarn color A and B, because the yarn color changes can get a little confusing along the way. But we're going to just continue working yarn color B and then A back and forth all the way around, and that will be the end of our round 4. And here is what our ornament is looking like after 4 rounds. Of course, yours will be looking very different because each of these ornaments do end up looking so different, but we are going to just continue these 4 rounds all the way until the end, which is 12 rounds in total. So we're going to just do what we have just done 2 more times. I'm going to go ahead and put up that color chart here on the screen so you can pause it and follow along to just the chart, or you can rewind and listen to me explain the steps over again if you would like. But I will meet you back here after we have finished all 12 rounds for binding off the top and then assembling our ornament at the end. So I'll meet you back here after we're done with our 12 rounds in total. All right, I am back with those 12 rounds all completed, and here is what my super scrappy ornament is looking like right now. I will admit that I did take out some of these rounds. I worked back and changed up the colors because I was not liking how my scrap yarn balls were working together. Sometimes whenever you have 2 scrap yarn balls, the colors that end up matching together just don't look that great or leave it looking a little funny. In my case, a red lined up with red and it just made a large stripe of red through the middle. And I wish I was the kind of person that could just leave that and let that be a super scrappy ornament, but I could not. I had to just unwork it. So that's totally an option as you work these ornaments. You can undo it if you're not liking how the colors are lining up, or you can just fully go for it and see what happens. So now I'm just going to go ahead and bind off our stitches using color A. So I'm just going to do a standard bind off. You can use whatever method you would like, but we are just going to bind off all of these stitches to get them off of our needle. And I will meet you back here once we're finished with that to start forming this into our ornament. All right, I went ahead and cut a long yarn tail for that yarn we used to cast off our stitches, and I cut off our other yarn strand as well. So it is completely disconnected from our needles, and we are ready to start forming this into an ornament. Our first step is actually going to be to turn our ornament inside out. So we are going to work this first step with it inside out, so we have the yarn strands in the back showing instead of the pretty color work on the outside, although I do tend to think that the inside of these scrappy projects look really cute too, and I am very tempted to one day just make this be the outside, but not today. So we will find that yarn tail that we started with down here that we left long and thread it through our needle. And then we're going to insert our needle in all of the stitches around the outside here. So the goal is going to be to cinch this shut, and we're going to just do that by inserting our needle through a stitch and then skipping a stitch or two and repeating that all the way around. So we are just making this loose stitching in and out all the way around until we get back to the beginning. Once we reach the beginning, we can go ahead and pull that yarn tail tight, and that's going to close up this opening. And now I like to just make it a little bit more secure by inserting our needle into the opposite side. So just a stitch through the opposite side there and pulling tight and coming back to the side we started on just to help close up that gap in the middle. And I'm going to do that through just a few of these stitches, alternating sides, just to help close it up and make sure that this part that's kind of starting to pull together and create a lump is on the inside and not the outside. So we want to make sure it's very secure on the inside, just like this. And once you feel like it is secure, we can go ahead and just loop it around, tie a knot or two to secure our yarn. I like to just insert it through anywhere and then loop around that opening, and it creates a little knot. But however you want to fasten that off. And now I'm going to cut these yarn tails not super short, just about right there. And we don't have to worry about tucking them in because once we flip the ornament inside out like this, they're going to be hidden down in there. So as you can see, that opening at the bottom is laying pretty flat, and that is exactly what we want. So now we can go ahead and grab our plastic ornament here and insert it into our knitting. And don't worry if you are noticing that your knitting is not reaching the top of the ornament. That is by design. So if you are customizing this to another side, you do want to leave about an inch or so between where your knitting stops and where the ornament stops, because once we do this next step, it's going to stretch these stitches out, which is exactly what we want. So we don't want it to go too long and risk it puckering at the bottom. We want it to be stretched over the plastic ornament to create the perfect circle that we're striving for. So I'm going to go ahead and take my needle that is thread along this ending yarn tail, and I tucked that other yarn tail down into the ornament just like those at the bottom. And I'm going to take this and do the same thing that we did around the bottom. So just every few stitches, we are going to insert our needle and pull through all the way until the beginning, and it's going to start to pull up on the top of the ornament. And once you reach the beginning, you're going to just pull tight, just like we did at the bottom. There we go. And it's going to have some resistance because we are stretching that up. As you can see, it is now fully covering the ornament. And we are going to secure this yarn by keeping it tight and then tying a knot up here. So just like I showed you at the bottom, I'm just going to insert my needle there, pull through, and then insert it down below this loop that I've made and pull through tightly. And I'm going to repeat that again just to make sure that it is very secure. And then we can tuck this yarn tail down into the ornament. So I'm just going to insert my needle down along the plastic and pop it out a few rows down. And we can cut that yarn tail off. We can also go through and cut off any of our strands that are looking like this, sticking out. And we can do that all the way around our ornament, cutting off those little strands that are left over from our scrappy yarn to clean up our ornament. And here is our finished scrappy ornament. I hope you enjoyed today's video learning how to knit your own scrappy ornament. If you did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more crochet patterns and tutorials. And you can find all of my other patterns on Ravelry, Rippler, and Etsy. Thanks for watching. Bye.